The Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil here on GB News, and it's a busy show today as always. Let's see what's coming up.
Rishi Sunak is at the G7 summit in Japan with all the world leaders.
And water companies have apologised for polluting our waterways with sewage and have committed to investing £10 billion of your money into the infrastructure and maintenance. We'll be talking to a campaigner who doesn't quite buy it.
And Philip Schofield's brother Tim Schofield will be sentenced today. We'll be live with GB News South West reporter Jeff Moody outside the courthouse in Bristol, and we'll bring you the sentencing when it happens.
And so-called fat jabs are being prescribed to teenagers. Is this a new medical saviour or a dangerous precedent? We'll be asking that question.
Plus, Royal Mail have posted losses of £1 billion. We'll be joined by the head of media for the Communications Workers Union.
And as ever this morning, we want to hear from you, so get involved with the show. Email us at gbviews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. But before we start, here's your latest news headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Esther. Good morning. It's just gone 2 minutes past 10. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Russian diamond imports to the UK are part of a new wave of sanctions against Moscow in response to the war in Ukraine. At the G7 summit in Japan, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced copper, aluminium and nickel imports have also been banned. In addition, the UK is preparing new individual sanctions against 86 people and companies. The rest of the G7 is expected to unveil similar measures. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is due to attend the gathering in Hiroshima this weekend as he prepares to travel to Japan. The bombardment of his country continues, with Russia launching another air assault overnight. Kyiv says 19 of 28 drones and missiles were destroyed by anti-aircraft units in several regions. It's the 10th attack this month and the second in less than 24 hours. Guardrails will be put in place by the government to regulate the growth of artificial intelligence. The Prime Minister says laws need to be updated to keep up with the rapid advance of AI. It's after BT Group announced it's cutting up to 55,000 jobs by the end of the decade as it moves to automated services. Rishi Sunak says AI risks will be addressed during talks with world leaders in Japan. The UK semiconductor industry is being given a massive funding boost. The government's promised a £1 billion investment over the next decade. The move's designed to reduce the country's reliance on China for essential microchip supplies. The brother of TV star Philip Schofield is being sentenced for child sex offences at Bristol Crown Court. 54-year-old Timothy Schofield was convicted of 11 offences involving a child between 2016 and 2019. After the trial this morning, TV host Philip Schofield publicly disowned his brother. More than 6 million disabled people will receive a one-off cost of living payment of £150. The government says it recognises the extra costs often faced, such as care and mobility needs. The payment will be made from the 20th of June. Pensioners can also expect more financial support. They'll be given £300 later this year. The UK's leading ocean charity says Scotland's water companies must be more closely monitored. That's after the Marine Conservation Society found sewage had been dumped in the sea for 113,000 hours last year. Scottish Water says it remains committed to improving water quality and has pledged to introduce more than 1,000 new monitors by 2024. The government's set to miss its target for installing electric vehicle chargers at motorway services in England. The RAC claims just 27 out of 119 currently meet the target. The motoring body says fitting high-powered chargers isn't straightforward, and it's urging ministers to make the process simpler. The government's had pledged every motorway service would have at least 6 rapid chargers by the end of this year. Counting is underway following the Northern Ireland local elections. The polls closed last night with more than 400 seats up for grabs across 11 councils. It's the first electoral test for parties since last year's Assembly elections. The final results aren't expected to be confirmed until tomorrow. The number of people in the UK with a heart rhythm condition has topped 1.5 million for the first time. Atrial fibrillation causes an irregular heartbeat, and the British Heart Foundation's warning there's been a 50% rise in cases since 2013. The charity says without treatment, people are 5 times more likely to have a fatal or life-changing stroke. The latest figures mean 1 in 45 people in the UK are now confirmed to have the condition. But the charity fears a further 270,000 remain undiagnosed. In Australia, an investigation is underway after a 95-year-old grandmother was tasered by police. The force was called to a care home near Sydney after staff found the resident holding a steak knife. Police say they reacted after she refused to drop the implement. She's now in a critical condition in hospital. The New South Wales Assistant Police Commissioner Peter Cotter spoke to reporters about the incident.
At the time she was tasered, she was approaching police, but it is fair to say at a slow pace. She had a walking frame. Given what was before us at midday on Wednesday, this investigation was nominated as a level 1 critical incident.
And police in the US state of Iowa have released dramatic video from 2021 of an officer clinging to the roof of a wanted man's car.
Stop it! Stop the car! Stop the car! Put on goddamn brakes!
What started out as a traffic stop quickly escalated after the officer, Patrick McCarthy, realised there was an arrest warrant against the driver. Dennis Gidders Jr. refused to get out of the car, so the officer climbed onto the bonnet with his gun drawn to prevent a getaway. The officer broke his back after losing his grip. The suspect was sentenced last week to up to 5 years in prison. This is GB News. We're bringing more as it happens now, though. It's back to Esther and Philip.
Thank you, Rhiannon. That was a particularly exciting news bulletin, I thought, today. I don't know what else thought about that. Now, the leaders of the world's most powerful democracies gather in Japan today for the G7 summit taking place in Hiroshima.
The powers of China and Russia are expected to dominate the agenda, with President Zelensky also now reportedly making an appearance during this weekend's events.
We're joined now by foreign policy expert Elizabeth Braw. Elizabeth, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to join us. I just wondered, these G7 summits, are they just photo opportunities for world leaders, or do they actually really matter to the public?
Well, sometimes they look like photo opportunities, and often, in fact, they are held in scenic locations. Hiroshima is obviously has been selected by the Japanese government because it's a reminder of the horrors of war. But we should remember that it's not just photo opportunities. It is substantial negotiations where these 7 leading actors plus the European Union try to agree on common positions. And that's not very easy when the economy, which is what these summits are about, when it's so closely linked to geopolitics. And the question is, how do you steer the economy when it clashes with geopolitics? And how do you try to punish the countries that are creating problems for the world?
It does seem to have got off at a pace, this G7 meeting, whether it's increased sanctions that we're looking there at Russia, whether it is the microchip deal over a 20-year scale, time frame that the UK's done in Japan. How are you seeing this G7 meeting?
I think what's already clear is that there is agreement among the participants that Russia should be punished even further. And we should remember that the more sanctions you introduce, the harder it gets to introduce more sanctions, because you have already sort of picked off the low-hanging fruit. But nevertheless, the G7 countries seem to be united, and we are seeing already other countries are said to be willing to follow the UK, or planning to follow the UK's lead on banning Russian diamonds. And that's actually quite significant because those diamonds are mostly processed in India. So yeah, these countries don't want to antagonize India, but clearly they have decided on this occasion that banning Russian diamonds is what they'll do. But the big question, of course, is what to do about China, which is not as overtly aggressive as Russia is, and it's also a much more important trading partner for all these countries. And so, what to do about China remains the big dilemma for these countries, and there are differences in opinion among them.
And that's why I mentioned the microchips, because they're looking at how can people get their supply chains up and running and cut China out. It seems that's the way they're going here, these G7 countries.
That's indeed the case, and we should remember that microchip manufacturing is extremely expensive to set up. So it requires some sort of government backing or guarantee if you want to bring the manufacturing to your country. It's already beginning to happen. A couple of major companies have announced they're setting up microchip manufacturing in the US. And the hope is obviously that will happen in other G7 countries as well, and not just the low-grade manufacturing, but the sort of chip manufacturing where we are dependent on China today. But that also involves training of workforce, for example, and also the bringing in the rest of the supply chain, or helping those companies bring in the rest of the supply chain so that they can run their factories. It's very complex, but it is what needs to happen, or otherwise we'll remain dependent on China, which is a moment, an element of uncertainty, increasing uncertainty for every day that goes by.
Can I ask about another Elizabeth, one called Liz Truss, who's now in Taiwan? Is that somewhat confusing, the G7 meeting? Is it a distraction?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because Liz Truss seems to be on frequent travels to countries where she holds a foreign policy speech, which is obviously her prerogative. But as you say, it does take some attention away from, or dilute the message that the UK government is trying to send, and in this case also the G7. Obviously, she doesn't hold government power anymore, so she can say whatever she likes. But nevertheless, she travels in her capacity as a former foreign secretary, former prime minister, and that then is seen as somehow representing the UK, and she takes a more assertive stance vis-à-vis China and Russia than the UK government, and indeed most other governments. So it is, I think, a distraction, and especially because it's so difficult to reach agreement between these major powers. And without that agreement, it's very difficult to be forceful vis-à-vis Russia, vis-à-vis China. So
Elizabeth
I'm afraid
Braw.
it's not very helpful.
Elizabeth Braw, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning and give us your insight into what's happening. Thank you.
And we're joined now by GB News political reporter Olivia Otley. Olivia, I just wondered, from Rishi Sunak's point of view, what constitutes a successful G7 summit from his perspective?
Well, in terms of the announcements which he's made, he does seem to be pretty chirpy at the moment. He feels as though it's been pretty successful so far. He's got this £8 billion worth of investment from Japanese businesses into the UK, which he's saying will create lots of new jobs in areas of the country which need sort of rejuvenation. The little bit of a fly in the ointment there is that there are a couple of car companies who are already saying that they would like Rishi Sunak to renegotiate the Brexit deal because the rules on exporting cars from the UK to the EU are more stringent than they were before. And there is talk that perhaps Nissan, of course, the big Japanese car maker, might join them in those calls, which would make things a little bit tricky for Rishi Sunak. On the whole, though, it seems to be going quite well. He's showing himself as this global leader on Ukraine. He's already promised sanctions on Russian metals, including Russian diamonds, and is calling the other Western leaders with him, which is exactly the sort of thing he needs to be doing if he wants to appear this sort of global statesman and hopefully get some more traction in his own party here at home. There's a little bit more disagreement within the G7 than perhaps we're seeing from the official communique that's coming out. Belgium, for example, is pretty reluctant to sanction Russian diamonds, so Rishi Sunak will have to try and get some more reluctant, recalcitrant G7 members along with him. But at the moment, appearing like a global leader on the world stage and getting this huge whack of investment from Japanese businesses all seems to be going relatively well.
I know we won't know yet, but I'm sure people will be slightly more reluctant as well about the aluminium, copper and nickel as well sanctions, because that's in a lot of manufacturing, so we could hear about that later too.
I just wondered, Olivia, from a domestic political point of view, I mean, obviously the boost to the economy is really important, and getting, people to invest in, I can see the political benefit from that. I just wondered, politically, politically for Rishi Sunak, is it important that he's seen as a statesman on the world stage? Does that give him political clout back home? Or might people be saying, do you know what, he should be back home, he should be sorting out the boats coming over the channel rather than sort of, out on the world stage trying to look important? What politically at home, what counts the most, do you think?
Well, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because there will be plenty of people sitting at home thinking, well, I can't afford to pay my mortgage and can't afford to buy my food in the supermarket and Rishi Sunak doesn't seem to be addressing it. And I think what's a bit problematic for him is the last thing he did, really, before he went to G7 was hold this farm to fork summit, which I think lots of people were expecting to be a serious summit where he called in farmers, heads of supermarkets, and tried to work out exactly why inflation has hit food on the shelves so badly. And it turned into what seemed to be just a bit of a PR stunt. And then he swans off to G7 to hold all of these talks. So it could be that people at home feel as though he shouldn't really be having one of these, global jamborees when we've got all of these issues at home. On the other hand, Boris Johnson managed to gain quite a lot of support by being the leader on Ukraine. I think there is a sort of gap in the market for a Prime Minister who appears to be a global statesman.
I mean, don't get me wrong, it's an exhausting schedule to be doing global politics as well as domestic ones. But now, don't you think the world is more global? Don't you think Brexit was about being more global, exporting more, making Britain great again, doing what you're doing? You've got the AI issues, artificial intelligence. And when you're talking about food prices, they were down to places like Russia and Ukraine. Where else are you going to get your food from to export? So really, he's in a tricky situation as we become this global entity once again.
He is, and he's also in a very tricky situation on the question of China and Taiwan, because, of course, we are poised for a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And again, the G7 seems a little bit split on the issue, although, of course, the rhetoric coming out of it sounds very unified. Behind the scenes, Japan and the US are far more hawkish on China than France and Germany. Emmanuel Macron actually said last month that we shouldn't get too involved in other people's conflicts. And it'll be really, really interesting to see where Rishi Sunak falls between those camps, because, of course, there are plenty of people back home who are very, very worried about the threat of China. But, of course, Britain is pretty reliant on China, unfortunately, for quite a lot of our manufacturing needs.
And again, Biden wants us to support him over China, and he has to think about where he places himself over sort of Ireland and the UK, doesn't he? So all of these relationships are key, aren't they, going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that we're also reliant on China for so many things, and really important things like semiconductors and things. And I think one of the things I think that you and Elizabeth mentioned, and I think this is a key part of the summit, and I'd be interested to know what your insight is on this, Olivia, is actually to look for the future about how the developed world becomes less reliant on China. That seems to be a big focus of these talks, doesn't it?
Definitely, and a lot of the Hiroshima Accord, which was agreed yesterday, was strengthening defence ties with Japan, but also a semiconductor partnership with Japan, so that the UK will start relying a bit more on Japan and less on China for these semiconductors. Another issue for Rishi Sunak is actually that Taiwan produces a lot of semiconductors as well. And if there was an invasion, of course, that global supply chain would be decimated. And as we saw during the COVID lockdowns, decimated supply chains hit the country pretty badly. So yes, one issue definitely, which will be a big deal at the G7, is how the UK becomes more self-reliant, or at least reliant on trustworthy allies.
Absolutely. Olivia Oatley, thank you so much for bringing us that update.
Coming up, we'll be joined by a clean water campaigner who has been fighting against the sewage discharges, and we'll be hearing the latest from the sentencing of Philip Schofield's brother.
And as always, we want to hear from you, so get in touch at GBNews at gbviews.uk. See you soon.
Hello again, welcome to your GB News forecast, brought to you by the Met Office. I'm Aidan McGivern. Brighter skies in the north today, but showers will drift further south, and the risk by the afternoon of some thunderstorms developing. It's all associated with a cold front, a weak cold front that's sinking south across the country, not bringing much rainfall, but that will destabilise into the afternoon as temperatures rise, leading to that risk of showers and thunderstorms, especially in a line from, say, the South Pennines into the Midlands towards Dorset. That's where the greatest risk of slow-moving heavy downpours, thunderstorms, even some hail is likely. So some localised impacts from this, particularly for central southern parts of England. Away from those showers, though, some signs of brightness, and certainly a brighter day for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, and feeling warmer as a result. 15 to 19 degrees generally. Now, the showers in the south tend to drift their way towards southwest England and parts of Wales through the evening. Eventually, after midnight, they're gone. But then we've got clear spells across England and Wales, and as a result, temperatures dipping into the single figures. 3 or 4 Celsius in some of the more sheltered spots where we've got the lengthy clear spells. But a milder night for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Here we've got areas of cloud returning. Some light rain first thing, not much. Most of the UK is going to be dry and the best of any brightness after a chilly start. England and Wales, plenty of sunny spells developing. Again, a bit of an onshore breeze there for the North Sea coast, limiting temperatures, but inland widely 18 to 22 Celsius. Scotland and Northern Ireland, still some brightness emerging, but by the end of the afternoon, areas of rain move into the west of Scotland, and then this becomes more widespread across Scotland into Northern Ireland on Saturday night. So a damp spell coming for much of Scotland and Northern Ireland heading into Sunday. But for England and Wales, it's another fine day with sunny spells and highs of 22 Celsius.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. Now, following a campaign led by The Times to clean up Britain's waterways, water companies have now apologised for raw sewage being dumped into rivers and seas and have promised to invest £10 billion by 2030 to tackle future spills.
The campaigners have attacked water companies after they admitted that their £10 billion pledge to stop sewage spills into Britain's rivers and seas will be paid for through higher consumer bills.
Well, we're joined now by Ashley Smith, one of the leading campaigners and founder of Windrush Against Sewage Pollution. Good to see you again, Ashley. So this apology, does this cut the mustard for you?
Absolutely not. It's already been recognised by Professor Dieter Helm, economist from Oxford University, as more spin than apology, and that's certainly the way we see it. It's about sort of a soft sell to the public. By the way, you're going to pay for this, but what a wonderful job we're going to finally do. But we're not falling for that in any way whatsoever.
I mean, I guess the argument is, Ashley, that, you know, these sewage discharges happen when the sewage works are inundated and there's potential flooding. So what's the alternative to that if they're not going to discharge some of that into the rivers? Presumably the alternative to that, they would say, would be that people get flooded.
Yeah, that is the alternative. They've been propping up for quite a long time. The illusion that they only do this in exceptional circumstances and that it's just to prevent people from being flooded by sewage backing up into their homes. The truth of the matter that we've established, our own analyst, Professor Peter Hammond, proved that they were using this facility as simply a dumping ground, using our waters as a toilet to prop up the fact that they haven't invested anywhere near enough money in the period of privatisation to be able to cope with the growing demands from a growing and, of course, paying population, and also the crumbling infrastructure, which doesn't heal itself, of course. It needs money. And some of that money is quite significant because pipes are often deep underground and need to be lined. So it's not a simple case of them obeying the law. It's a simple case of them actually not obeying the law on an industrial scale. And all we want to do is to, as a starting point, to get back to the point where they only dump untreated sewage in exceptional circumstances. And this is a catch-up.
Yeah,
and it's well overdue, well overdue. So during that period of time, the idea was that private investment money would come in and that they would take a reasonable return on bringing all this fresh capital in and fixing up all of the things that were broken back in 1989. What you're seeing now, that admission that we are actually going to pay for that £10 billion, you can apply that back to the £160 billion they claim to have invested already. That was, in fact,
actually,
established bill payers' money.
Ashley, hold on. Ashley, you mentioned about that. You know, this is about underinvestment, under privatisation. Isn't it actually the case that this is a result of decades and decades and decades of no investment at all taking place into the sewage system during the decades of public ownership? And actually, if you look at the amount of investment that's gone into the sewage system and the water system generally during times of public ownership and private ownership, a hell of a lot more has gone in since the water companies were privatised. This is surely a legacy of the failure of public ownership, isn't it?
So prior to privatisation, it was a very unpopular thing coming up to 1989, and all of this was predicted. Government squeezed the funding of the water industry and squeezed it dreadfully, down to about £2 billion a year. So it became much worse, and it became a much easier sell to bring in privatisation, and that's what it did. But instead of bringing in fresh capital, all it did was bring bill payers' money to the water companies to spend, but also to suck money away from. So they took, while they were putting in £160 billion, they were taking out 72.
Ashley, we will no doubt speak to you again. We want to congratulate you for your campaign, but we're going to have to move to another court case that's happening concurrently. So thank you for your time, and we'll speak to you again. Now, a child sex offender is being sentenced in Bristol Crown Court today.
54-year-old Timothy Schofield, brother of TV host Philip Schofield, who was a civilian worker for Avon and Somerset Police, has been found guilty of sexually abusing a boy.
Joining us now with the latest is our South West of England reporter, Jeff Moody. So, Jeff, can you give us the latest on the situation?
Yes, well, Timothy Schofield arrived here at Bristol Crown Court around half an hour ago in a police van. He's due to be sentenced any moment now, after which we're expecting a statement right here from Avon and Somerset Police. And we will, of course, bring you that statement live as soon as it happens. He was found guilty at Exeter Crown Court of 11 offences. He pleaded not guilty to those offences, claiming that the boy was 16 at the time. But the victim, who of course can't be named for legal reasons, said that he had been subjected to this abuse from Mr. Schofield over a number of years. The jury heard how the boy was only 13 at the time that it first happened, and that it happened on a regular basis. The jury then found Mr. Schofield guilty of all charges, including 2 of sexual activity with a minor. Well, these allegations came to light when the victim talked to a counsellor in November 2021, and 3 weeks later Mr. Schofield was arrested. Well, there are several shocking things about this case. Firstly, of course, the nature of the crimes itself, but also Mr. Schofield was working for the police. He works for the IT department of Avon and Somerset Police. And then, of course, added to that is the high-profile nature of Mr. Schofield's brother, the presenter Philip Schofield, who released a statement recently in which he said, "My overwhelming concern is and always has been for the well-being of the victim and his family. These are despicable crimes, and I welcome the guilty verdict. As far as I am concerned, I no longer have a brother." Well, the senior investigating officer, Detective Inspector Keith Smith, said that the defendant had exploited and abused his position by carrying out a sickening series of offences over a significant period of time. Well, as I say, he is in court right now, due to be sentenced any minute now, and we'll bring you the result as soon as we get it.
Jeff Moody, thank you very much indeed, and I know you'll be bringing us the latest as it happens here on GB News. Thank you.
Now, coming up, are fat jabs the way forward to fix Britain's obesity crisis? And what does it mean for the Royal Mail after they've announced £1 billion losses?
And as always, we want to hear from you, so get in touch, gbnews@gbviews.uk. But first, here's the latest news with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Esther. It's 10:33, your top stories from the GB newsroom, and we bring you some breaking news to start with. A 21-year-old man has pleaded guilty to plotting a gun attack at Speaker's Corner in London's Hyde Park. Edward Little from Brighton appeared at the Old Bailey and will be sentenced later. Russian diamond imports to the UK are part of a new wave of sanctions against Moscow in response to the war in Ukraine. At the G7 summit in Japan, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced copper, aluminium and nickel imports have also been banned. In addition, the UK is preparing new individual sanctions against 86 people and companies. The rest of the G7 is expected to unveil similar measures. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is due to attend the gathering in Hiroshima this weekend. As he prepares to travel to Japan, the bombardment of his country continues, with Russia launching another air assault overnight. Kyiv says 19 of 28 drones and missiles were destroyed by anti-aircraft units in several regions. It's the 10th attack this month and the second in less than 24 hours. The UK's semiconductor industry is being given a massive funding boost. The government's promised a £1 billion investment over the next decade. The move's designed to reduce the country's reliance on China for essential microchip supplies. And as we've been hearing, the brother of TV star Philip Schofield has arrived at Bristol Crown Court for sentencing over child sex offences. 54-year-old Timothy Schofield was convicted of 11 offences involving a child between 2016 and 2019. After the trial this morning, TV host Philip Schofield publicly disowned his brother. And more than 6 million disabled people will receive a one-off cost of living payment of £150. The government says it recognises the extra costs often faced, such as care and mobility needs. The payment will be made from the 20th of June. Pensioners can also expect more financial support. They'll be given £300 later this year. TV online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2417 and 1.1503 euros. The price of gold is £1,583.01 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,776 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News, Investments That Matter.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Philip. It's 10:39. Lots of views coming in about various things, the G7, water companies. Esther, where do you want to go?
Sue says it should not be customers that pay the bill for these promised improvements. It should be the shareholders and directors who've benefited hugely from our water companies. That's the £10 billion that are going into the infrastructure over the next 7 years.
Martin says, typical socialists wanting the taxpayer to pay for everything. Of course, customers will pay a little more for better water service. As pipes are replaced, there will be less leakage and therefore costs will go down. They think money just appears.
And Collins says there's no doubt these water companies have been using these Victorian drains for little or no cost, and they haven't been doing the upkeep there, but they should be paid for by the new house builders and not the general population on their monthly water bill. Keep those views coming in. Now, forget dieting, the gym, healthy eating. What if losing weight was as easy as a weekly jab?
Sounds good to me.
Well, that's the likely future being presented this week at the European Congress on Obesity over in Dublin.
The researchers' studies have demonstrated the effectiveness of two different weight loss drugs in helping obese users shed their extra flab.
And it's not just adults either. Researchers in Dublin are also suggesting that obese teenagers should be prescribed a new weekly weight loss jab for the rest of their lives. I think that's a disgrace, by the way.
Oh.
A jab every week for the rest of your life. Well, and that's just to help manage their weight.
Joining us now to discuss this is Dr. Lawrence Gurlis. Lawrence, thank you very much for joining us. I mean, I don't know, lots of people might think, why on earth should the NHS be encouraging, let alone paying for, get thin, fast jabs? Shouldn't people just be told to eat less and take a bit more responsibility for that?
I would agree with that, absolutely, Philip. We do have 2 out of 3 adults in this country who are obese. You're both slim and fit, which is very reassuring. But obesity is a major problem, mainly due to the availability of fast food and poor quality food and bad eating habits. Most people eat out of habit rather than hunger. So we do have a problem. And we haven't had any decent appetite suppressants for many years. The old days of fenfluramine and tenuate and drugs like that, which were basically all amphetamines, which are highly addictive and highly dangerous. So it is actually quite useful to have a medication that works for the severely obese people. Whether the NHS should pay for it or not is another matter, because these are expensive preparations. I'm prescribing it in private practice, and my patients are paying £200 a month. And I'm really not sure that that is the answer for the NHS. I think we should need to teach people to eat healthier diets and eat less, basically.
You're prescribing them. The bit that upset me, and I don't know if you're just prescribing them, is to young teenagers. Weekly forever. Now, I personally think that's a disgrace. This is, for me, money to the pharmaceutical industry. What are we doing?
No, I agree. I certainly wouldn't prescribe it for children. We do have a childhood obesity problem. We're seeing children with type 2 diabetes. Bear in mind, this medication was originally introduced to treat diabetes. Having said that, diabetes is a serious and major condition, which, if not treated properly, will cause long-term health problems. At the moment, I wouldn't agree with the idea that children should have an injection every week for the rest of their life. But, this is a useful and very effective medication. It does have some side effects, particularly I've seen inflammation of the pancreas, pancreatitis. So nothing, you don't get anything for nothing. The other point you make, Esther, is that I've seen patients lose weight on these injections, but then when they come off, their appetite comes back again. The weight tends to go back on if you haven't changed your eating habits.
Dr. Lawrence Gurlis, thank you so much indeed for joining us this morning. And we'd love to know at home what you think about this. Should the NHS be providing these drugs to help people lose weight? Might it save the NHS money in the long run because they don't have to deal with the consequences of obesity? Or should we tell people they should take a bit of individual responsibility for their weight and just tell them to eat less? Let us know what you think.
If it seems too good to be true, it invariably is. Now, the Royal Mail has reported losses of £1 billion. The parent company, International Delivery Services, has blamed these losses on industrial action and a lack of modernisation.
Joining us to discuss Royal Mail's losses and its accusations against striking workers is General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union, Dave Ward. Dave, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We do very much appreciate it. What do you make of this then? £1 billion losses. The company say it's down to lack of modernisation and industrial action. Is this the union and its members committing sort of employment suicide by holding the company to ransom like this?
Good morning. No, I mean, we're really disappointed with what Royal Mail said yesterday. We're in no doubt that the company faces really challenging times. It's not just the financial results. On top of that, earlier in the week, you saw disastrous quality of service results. What we completely reject is that this is somehow down to workers not working hard enough, a lack of the union willing to modernise. We actually had an agreement 2.5 years ago to introduce a 24/7 network. The company walked away from that agreement. What this is about, and the full story, I think, will emerge, and has emerged at different times, is this is the biggest corporate failure that this country has seen in decades. And you could speak to any postal worker in the UK, and I guarantee you they will tell you that the way that Royal Mail have treated frontline employees over the last year is an absolute disgrace. And they had this mantra where they said it's their business to run, and they've imposed change in every single work location in the UK. This was one of the reasons that led to the dispute. And that change has proven to be an absolute disaster for the company.
Dave,
so whilst we understand the challenges that are in front of us, and we've reached an agreement, and we want that agreement to work, the first test for that agreement is, are the company going to be honest with their own frontline employees and show some humility
David, if I can
about
just
what's going on?
If I can just ask you about, I mean, you must accept surely that industrial action hardly helps the company's performance and its financial situation, and the more the company gets into a difficult financial situation, presumably, the more pressure it will be under to cut costs, and the people who will suffer when they cut those costs are your workers. So, I mean, surely you must accept some responsibility that your industrial action has contributed to the poor financial performance of the employers of your members.
Well, what Royal Mail say is that industrial action cost about £200 million. We didn't want to be in a strike. We were fighting to defend jobs, terms, conditions and services. And had we actually
David Ward, I'm sorry about this, David. We hope to come back to you. So, David, we've got a breaking news item and I've got to go to it, but we're hoping to come back to you because we've got a few questions left to ask you. So if you just hold on, we'll do this news and we'll come back to you.
We're now going to the sentencing of Philip Schofield's brother Timothy, who's been sentenced outside Bristol Crown Court.
Free and safe, and he spoke about there was detail about the impacts of the crime, how the victim had felt stress, fear, and panic. Now, this trial was heard about a month ago. They were discussing how.
Well, it seems that we will be coming to that a little bit later. That was the sentencing that's going on for Tim Schofield there, brother of Philip Schofield. So either we can go back to Jeff Moody or can we go back to David Ward? Let's go back to David Ward. David, sorry about that interruption. Breaking news of the sentencing. We have got other questions to ask you. And you were explaining to us how this industrial action has or hasn't impacted what's going to happen now, and come to the sort of possible less staff being employed if it's taken such a toll on the business.
Yeah, so what we were saying was that the companies say that the industrial action cost them about £200 million. But, I mean, it takes two parties to be involved in a dispute. We didn't want a dispute. We wanted them to honour the original agreement that we had. You know, I mean, we hope that there's some sort of independent investigation into what's gone on in Royal Mail over the last year. I mean, the Select Committee have already seen the performance of Royal Mail management. The CEO has now left the company because he didn't tell the truth about what was actually going on. And some of Royal Mail's stuff yesterday was appalling in terms of blaming their own frontline employees for not working hard enough when they have imposed complete and utter chaos on the front line. In every delivery office, in every mail centre across the UK. This is down to the way that Royal Mail have acted. Now, we
Dave Ward, how do we
find an agreement? We've got an agreement that's going to go in front of our members, but the company must change their attitude. If they don't do that, and the start of that is telling the truth. And, you know, what they framed the debate around yesterday was a very one-sided position. And I know that postal workers across the UK are angry about what the company said.
David Ward, thank you very much indeed for joining us there. I know we've been a little bit back and forward there, but here is now the breaking news. I think we're going to be joined by Jeff Moody. So if we can go over to Jeff.
To us in December 2021, and within 48 hours, Timothy Schofield had been arrested, interviewed, and charged for his sickening series of offences. He was suspended from duty, and misconduct proceedings against him were paused so that the criminal case could take priority. Following his conviction, a misconduct hearing was held on Tuesday the 25th of April and chaired by Assistant Chief Constable Will White. At this hearing, he was dismissed without notice, and he'll now be placed on a national barred list, which will prevent him from working in law enforcement again. The victim in this case has shown remarkable bravery in disclosing the horrific offences committed against him, and their support of the police investigation and court process has been invaluable to us. We hope that their courage and determination will encourage other victims of sexual abuse to come forward and speak to the police, no matter how long ago those offences occurred. We want them to know that they will be believed and respected, and we will always do our very best to bring the suspects to justice. Although the offences Timothy Schofield committed were not connected to his employment, we know the fact that he was a member of police staff will cause great concern to the public. It's important to stress that before the allegations were made to the police in December, there were no prior complaints or allegations made about the defendant, and his former colleagues are horrified for the offences for which he's been convicted now. We want to be absolutely clear. We're on a mission to root out all of those who betray the standards and the values we are committed to uphold. The public must be able to trust the police, officers and staff, and protect that bond is our priority. Finally, we would like to thank all those who supplied us with information and evidence in support of our investigation, which has ultimately enabled us to achieve justice today for the victim in this case. Thank you very much, everyone.
That was Detective Inspector Keith Smith there outside Bristol Court. We're also joined today by political commentator Dominic Samuels and Assistant Editor-in-Chief of the London Financial, Andy MacDonald. We'll be speaking to you about the various stories that we've had on the programme today. But first, we're going to go back to our GB News reporter, Jeff Moody, for more on that story.
Well, there you go. We just heard live from Detective Inspector Keith Smith, who was talking about how the police really need to work a lot harder to be trusted. He talked a little bit about the stress involved in this case and the number of people that really haven't been trusting the police, and he says that a lot more work needs to be done. He stressed that Mr. Schofield had no prior convictions. They had no idea that something like this might happen. He said that the public really must be able to put their trust in the police, and the police need to work a lot harder to gain that trust. Well, this has come just after Mr. Schofield received 12 years in jail after being found guilty of 11 offences involving a minor. The officer there spoke about the bravery of the victim for coming forward. He came forward in November 2021. He talked to a counsellor about the experience that he said he'd had since he was 13 years of age. And Mr. Detective Inspector Keith Smith just now said that that bravery should be praised, and he said that we should really be encouraging other people to come forward in similar circumstances, however long ago it was that has happened. Back to you.
Jeff Moody, thanks ever so much indeed for bringing us that update. So Timothy Schofield, brother of Philip Schofield, jailed for 12 years for child sex offences, and we heard there from the police investigating officer, and obviously Timothy Schofield was an employee of the police force.
And here we are back in the studio now with Dominic Samuels and Andy MacDonald. Of course, we started off the show with the G7 meeting there, the world leaders coming together. Kevin, one of our viewers, have come in and said the West is not a match for the powerful East anymore. Do you think that's the case, Andy, or do you think these G7 meetings actually bring the West together? Or like-minded?
Well, I think it's quite constructive to see, you know, over COVID, it's been a bit kind of shattered. You've had on and off meetings internationally looking at NATO, some of the EU meetings, but it's good to see, you know, the EU Commissioner, you know, the Japanese leadership, the UK Prime Minister, all together in Japan discussing what the steps forward are. You know, we've seen some interesting things come from it. You know, earlier today, the Rishi Sunak announcing the sanctions on Russia. I don't know whether that was a result of some discussions at the G7 conference or not. But it's quite interesting.
The sanctions were because they were part of how do we hold China to account and how do we make ourselves independent from there? What will sort of hurt the sanctions and how can we build up other sectors? Dominique?
Yeah, I think things like the summit are largely ceremonial now, and I think
So you didn't think this was an important meeting? You thought it was ceremonial?
Yeah, to be honest, because I think the viewer there actually has a point. We've spent decades actually building the East up, relying on them for, importing goods that we no longer produce under the guise of, this sort of liberal economic order. And I think all in all it's actually failed, because what we've seen is, Britain's not exactly in a very strong position. We're heavily reliant on America, which isn't in a very strong position at all anymore. And what we're seeing is the rise of China, which is largely on the side of Russia when it comes to this war. So, not great.
Greg says, one of our viewers, UK politicians have got to decide who you're serving because Rishi Sunak is serving the globalists. And that sort of sums up.
Well, you'll both be with us for the next hour. We want to hear from our viewers too, but plenty more still to come on the show. Meghan and Harry are celebrating their 5th wedding anniversary today. Is it just me, or has it been a very long 5 years? We'll be discussing that and the latest on their car chase.
I will see you very soon.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. Coming up, we'll be getting the latest from the G7 summit. What do you think? Does the summit matter, or is it all ceremonial?
We'll have an economic roundup with GB News business and economics editor Liam Halligan.
And the Sunday Times Rich List has just been published today. We'll let you know who's made the shortcut.
We'll still be joined as well by our punchy panel with political commentator Dominique Samuels and assistant editor-in-chief of the London Financial, Andy MacDonald. All this and more coming up after the latest news with Rhiannon.
Good morning, it's 11:01. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The brother of TV star Philip Schofield has been jailed for 12 years for child sex offences. 54-year-old Timothy Schofield committed 11 offences between 2016 and 2019. He told the court he'd watched pornography with the boy, insisting he was over the age of 16 at the time, but the jury found him guilty on all counts. After the trial, This Morning TV host Philip Schofield publicly disowned his brother. Outside Bristol Crown Court, Detective Inspector Keith Smith gave his reaction.
Timothy Schofield, who worked for Avon and Somerset Police at our headquarters at Portishead, committed a series of sickening offences for which he's now been brought to justice. The offences were first reported to us in December 2021, and within 48 hours, Timothy Schofield had been arrested, interviewed and charged for this sickening series of offences. He was suspended from duty and misconduct proceedings against him were paused so that the criminal case could take priority.
Russian diamond imports to the UK are part of a new wave of sanctions against Moscow in response to the war in Ukraine. In the last few moments, G7 leaders have gathered for a family photo in Japan. At the summit, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced copper, aluminium and nickel imports have also been banned. In addition, the UK is preparing new individual sanctions against 86 people and companies. The rest of the G7 is expected to unveil similar measures. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is due to attend the gathering in Hiroshima this weekend. As he prepares to travel to Japan, the bombardment of his country continues, with Russia launching another air assault overnight. Kyiv says 19 of 28 drones and missiles were destroyed by anti-aircraft units in several regions. It's the 10th attack this month and the second in less than 24 hours. Guardrails will be put in place by the government to regulate the growth of artificial intelligence. The Prime Minister says laws need to be updated to keep up with the rapid advance of AI. It's after BT Group announced it's cutting up to 55,000 jobs by the end of the decade as it moves to automated services. Rishi Sunak says AI risks will be addressed during talks with world leaders in Japan. The UK's semiconductor industry is being given a massive funding boost. The government's promised a £1 billion investment over the next decade. The move's designed to reduce the country's reliance on China for essential microchip supplies. More than 6 million disabled people will receive a one-off cost of living payment of £150. The government says it recognises the extra costs often faced, such as care and mobility needs. The payment will be made from the 20th of June. Pensioners can also expect more financial support. They'll be given £300 later this year. The UK's leading ocean charity says Scotland's water companies must be more closely monitored. That's after the Marine Conservation Society found sewage had been dumped in the sea for 113,000 hours last year. Scottish Water says it remains committed to improving water quality and has pledged to introduce more than 1,000 new monitors by 2024. The government's set to miss its target for installing electric vehicle chargers at motorway services in England. The RAC claims just 27 out of their 119 currently meet the target. The motoring body says fitting high-powered chargers isn't straightforward, and it's urging ministers to make the process simpler. The government had pledged every motorway service would have at least 6 rapid chargers by the end of this year. counting's underway following the Northern Ireland local elections. The polls closed last night with more than 400 seats up for grabs across 11 councils. It's the first electoral test for parties since last year's Assembly elections. The final results aren't expected to be confirmed until tomorrow. The number of people in the UK with a heart rhythm condition has topped 1.5 million for the first time. Atrial fibrillation causes an irregular heartbeat. The British Heart Foundation's warning there's been a 50% rise in cases since 2013. The charity says without treatment, people are 5 times more likely to have a fatal or life-changing stroke. The latest figures mean 1 in 45 people in the UK are now confirmed to have the condition, but the charity fears a further 270,000 remain undiagnosed. And police in the US state of Iowa have released dramatic footage of an officer clinging to the roof of a wanted man's car.
Stop it! Stop the car! Stop the car! Put on goddamn brakes!
What started out as a traffic stop quickly escalated after the officer realised there was an arrest warrant against the driver. When the man refused to get out of the car, Patrick McCarthy climbed onto the bonnet to prevent a getaway. After clinging on for a good chunk of the police chase, McCarthy eventually lost his grip and broke his back. The footage was from 2021. The suspect was sentenced last week to up to 5 years in prison. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Esther and Philip.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Now, the leaders of 7 of the world's most powerful democracies gather in Japan today for the annual G7 summit taking place in Hiroshima.
The powers of China and Russia are expected to dominate the agenda, with President Zelensky also now reportedly making an appearance during this week's events.
We're joined now by former National Security Advisor Sir Mark Lyle Grant. Thank you ever so much indeed for joining us. How important is this summit, do you think, at the G7 for world politics? Some people might say that, you know, this is the last remnants of the West, and actually it's the East now that's taken over the world, and this is a bit of a sideshow. What's your view about that?
No, I think these G7 summits are important. They still represent most of the richest countries in the world, and even some outside the 7 are being invited. So India, for instance, has been invited, Vietnam has been invited, Brazil. So some other big players are invited as observers to this summit. What's unusual, I think, about the summit this weekend is it's very much a geopolitical one. It's not going to be talking so much about the economy, energy, financial crisis, such as dominated agendas previously. It's going to be very much focused on Russia, Ukraine on the one hand, and on the threat from China on the other. So for that reason as well, it's a very important meeting, I think.
And how do you think Rishi is being accepted here? Do you think he is actually playing a powerful role amongst this group?
Well, it's Rishi Sunak's first meeting as at the G7 summit, so it's an important one for him. I mean, Britain is there by right. I mean, we are the 5th largest economy in the world. Still, we have a global reach. We have a strong diplomatic network, nuclear weapons, etc., permanent member of the Security Council. So there's no question that we earn our right to be part of this elite group. Now, Rishi Sunak will be treated like all other members of the group. I mean, there are regular rotations. The Italian Prime Minister, for instance, it's her first meeting as well this week. So I don't think it's relevant so much who the individual is as the country that they represent.
And I guess the main focus in the geopolitical world is about China, and there seems to be lots of focus on not relying on China so much for important pieces of equipment. Esther and I went on a cross-party delegation to Washington, and they seem to be obsessed with that in Congress and the Senate. Is this really the biggest geopolitical issue for these Western democracies for the future? How you end your reliance on China?
That certainly is a very important topic. I think what we'll see at the summit is a great deal of unity, strength, solidarity on the issue of Russia and Ukraine. And the leaders have already issued a very strong statement, increased sanctions against Russia, as we heard in the news bulletin. But on China, there is more nuances of difference between the different countries, with France and Germany perhaps at one end of the spectrum and the United States at the other, wanting to take a tougher line against China. So I think all the Western countries want to reduce their reliance on China, want to resist China's economic coercion, and want to push back against the Chinese threat to the world order set up after the Second World War. But there are differences in how much they want to decouple their economies from China.
So,
and that's a particular challenge for the United Kingdom, because post-Brexit, we can't really afford not to have some form of trade and investment relationship with China, which is already the second largest economy in the world.
So, Mark, with Liz Truss in Taiwan and Boris Johnson in Seoul, is this helpful or not for this G7 meeting?
Well, I don't think it changes the price of fish, to be honest, what sort of ex-prime ministers are doing in the region. I think what matters is how the G7 can come together and agree a strategic policy towards China that is sustainable in the longer term. You know, there may be a change of American president in the next 18 months. That will be extremely significant in terms of dealing with China. So I think all the countries around the table today will want to bring together their collective approach and show that they are united in dealing with the challenge of rising China in a way that does not escalate a conflict with China, which of course no one wants and would be catastrophic for the world economy.
So Mark Lyle-Grant, thank you very much indeed for giving us your insight today. Now, some good news.
Hooray.
Consumer
Hooray.
confidence is up as the British economy fights back against the doom and gloom. And at the same time, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has pledged £500 million to persuade car maker Jaguar Land Rover to build an electric battery gigafactory in the UK.
Well, we're joined now by GB News economic and business editor Liam Halligan.
So, Liam, £500 million. That sounds like an awful lot of money. Is this the right thing for the government to be doing, to be giving this sort of going back to the 1970s subsidy kind of approach?
There's a lot of economics news around today, Phil and Esther, as there often is on a Monday, so we're going to do a bit of a mash-up. Consumer confidence first. The research firm GfK, they say that the UK Consumer Confidence Index has gone up from -30 to -27. So it's still not great, but that is the best reading since before the war in Ukraine, believe it or not. Back at the time of Liz Truss's mini-budget, you'll remember that. See the horror goes across Esther's face. That GfK reading was -49. So consumers are getting a bit more wind in their sails. They feel inflation's going to come down soon. Maybe interest rates will soon peak. And employment in most parts of the country still remains strong. And on that, the British government has offered Jaguar Land Rover, a British marque, of course, but ultimately owned by the Indian conglomerate Tata. It's offered them a £500 million package to persuade them to build a gigafactory for electric batteries in the UK rather than Spain. It's a combination of cash, cheaper energy, it's upgrades to the site where this gigafactory would be, near Bridgewater in Somerset, close to Hinkley Point, actually, where I was reporting from just a couple of weeks ago. And there's another sweetheart deal to Tata on the side, another £300 million to upgrade Tata's steelworks in Port Talbot. So the British government is clearly getting the chequebook out in order to try and keep Tata investing in the UK.
Well, but I want to know, if people see, car manufacturers see this going to Jaguar, won't they all have the hand up? Well, what about me? What about me? And we have various car manufacturers in the UK. Surely this can't end happily.
Well, this has been going on since we've been on the planet, all three of us. I mean, car makers, they routinely hold guns to the heads of governments of all persuasions. It's been going on for ages. It's maybe a bit more prominent now as it was in the 70s, as Phil said, because the global climate is a bit more tricky.
But when they've done support before, it's been as a generic, has it? You know, I know they've done other deals with Nissan and what, I get that, but this one now, surely all the hands will go out looking for cash.
Absolutely, because we're in the middle of this massive transition towards electric vehicles, and you can only really make electric vehicles in countries where they make the batteries, because the batteries are so heavy and so uneconomic to transport unless you're making them right next to the car making. That's why there's been so much speculation about whether or not this gigafactory will happen up in Blythe, north of Newcastle, with British Volt and so on. And also there's concern about the government's commitment to electric vehicles. Have a look at these numbers brought out by RAC today. About the number of electric vehicle charging points across the UK.
Yeah.
Now, there's a target...
No good if you haven't got a
There's a target to have 6 chargers per service station. That's by the end of the year. And RAC say 77% of service stations are on course to actually miss this target now. Across all UK service stations, say RAC, there are charging points for, get this, less than 700 cars. And guess how many battery EVs there are in the UK? 760,000. And that's why so many people who are thinking about buying cars, they're buying, at best, they're buying hybrids, which still have petrol and diesel engines, and you sort of charge a battery, some that you plug in, some you don't. But pure electric vehicles that you plug in, people aren't going for them because of this range anxiety.
I suppose the obvious thing that flows from that, Liam, is surely the government's going to have to stop this ban on new petrol and diesel cars by 2030, because surely the country's never going to be in a position to deal with that ban.
I've been predicting that for a long time. The EU governments, they've already pushed it back to 2035. I think the 2030 ban will definitely not be there, which is why, again, a lot of investors are thinking, do we really want to invest in these gigafactories if EV, ultimately, electric vehicles, aren't going to be the way to go? But in this sort of grand industrial policy, there's another big aspect too, geopolitically, and that's semiconductors. And semiconductors are in everything from cars to washing machines to dishwashers, all kinds of manufacturing. During the COVID pandemic, the global semiconductor supply chain collapsed, and now there's a lot of calls for governments to invest in the semiconductor industry, and the UK government is investing too. And today, they unveiled their long-awaited, been waiting for 2 years for the strategy. And here it is. Today, the government committed £1 billion over 10 years to the UK's semiconductor industry. Compare that to the US. They've committed £42 billion, and the EU has committed £37 billion. And that's why a lot of people are saying this plan is unambitious. And it's geopolitically very, very important. Why? Because Taiwan, off the coast of China, accounts for 60% of global semiconductor production still. And we all know the fears about China becoming increasingly dominant in Taiwan. It's not something we want to see, but it could well happen. So huge calls on the government to be actively investing in car making, in semiconductor manufacturing. It's hard ideologically, as you two will agree, for a Tory government to do.
Liam, thank you very much indeed, as always. As we all know, the best in the business. Thank you very much for that update.
And coming up, Jeremy Corbyn says he wants to stay as the Labour MP for Islington North, not become an independent one, but stay as the Labour MP.
And the Islington North constituency Labour Party seems to be backing him, with 98% of attendees at a recent meeting voting on a motion to support him.
Will this cause a big headache for Sir Keir Starmer? Send us your views, GBviews at gbnews.uk. Here's the weather.
Hello again, welcome to your GB News forecast, brought to you by the Met Office. I'm Aidan McGivern. Brighter skies in the north today, but showers will drift further south, and the risk by the afternoon of some thunderstorms developing. It's all associated with a cold front, a weak cold front that's sinking south across the country, not bringing much rainfall, but that will destabilise into the afternoon as temperatures rise, leading to that risk of showers and thunderstorms, especially in a line from, say, the South Pennines into the Midlands towards Dorset. That's where the greatest risk of slow-moving heavy downpours, thunderstorms, even some hail is likely. So some localised impacts from this, particularly for central southern parts of England. Away from those showers, though, some signs of brightness, and certainly a brighter day for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, and feeling warmer as a result. 15 to 19 degrees generally. Now, the showers in the south tend to drift their way towards southwest England and parts of Wales through the evening. Eventually, after midnight, they're gone. But then we've got clear spells across England and Wales, and as a result, temperatures dipping into the single figures. 3 or 4 Celsius in some of the more sheltered spots where we've got the lengthy clear spells. But a milder night for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Here we've got areas of cloud returning. Some light rain first thing, not much. Most of the UK is going to be dry and the best of any brightness after a chilly start. England and Wales, plenty of sunny spells developing. Again, a bit of an onshore breeze there for the North Sea coast, limiting temperatures, but inland widely 18 to 22 Celsius. Scotland and Northern Ireland, still some brightness emerging, but by the end of the afternoon, areas of rain move into the west of Scotland, and then this becomes more widespread across Scotland into Northern Ireland on Saturday night. So a damp spell coming for much of Scotland and Northern Ireland heading into Sunday. But for England and Wales, it's another fine day with sunny spells and highs of 22 Celsius.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. The time now is 11:24. I tell you, we've got our viewers all excised over those fat jabs. They should be called thin jabs, really, shouldn't they?
Yeah, Cherry says the world is going mad. Drugs to stop fat. Big Pharma will be very pleased as the side effects will cause other problems. Cherry says, I'm nearly 79, the same weight as when I was 16. Good for you, Cherry. I can't say the same.
And Rory said, applause to Esther. That's me for making the point that putting teenagers on anti-obesity drugs taken weekly for the rest of their lives is simply about siphoning money off to the pharma companies. It's a disgrace, exploitation and profiteering. It is not the only area where that is happening.
I'm with Arthur. The taxpayer shouldn't be paying for obese people's bad decisions. We should be prescribing healthy diets and exercise. They should go for a run. Well said, Arthur. I'm with you.
What, you going for a run?
Well...
No, that isn't true, is it?
They should...
Arthur, we stumped him. He
Arthur
doesn't
says,
go for
Arthur
a run.
says they should go for a run.
Oh,
I should go
I
for
see.
a run.
They should go for a run.
That's why I said
okay,
right.
yeah.
Anyway, Jeremy Corbyn has informed... Let's move on quickly. Jeremy Corbyn has informed Labour members in his Islington North constituency he wants to carry on as their MP after a motion by the local party supporting him was passed without any opposition.
The former Labour leader was barred last month from standing for the party at the next election. The statement about his desire to continue as a Labour MP could cause Labour some problems.
Well, we're joined now by political correspondent for The Guardian, Aubrey Allegretti. Aubrey, thanks for joining us. So, could this be a big headache for Keir Starmer, this battle with the Islington North Labour Party, or is this a battle he wants to have because it shows to the wider world how different his regime is from the previous one?
It certainly will cause some grumbles in Labour HQ. It will mean that they've potentially got a sort of fairly rebellious constituency Labour Party on their hands. I mean, it's worth sort of digging into the results of the motion that was passed. There were about 60 people who supported the motion, thanking Jeremy Corbyn for his service and saying that they wanted to reserve the right to pick their next MP, and just one abstention. That's out of a group of about 150 people, we believe, who could have voted. So we're talking quite small numbers, but, you know, the number of people interested in local politics is probably quite small to begin with. The question, I think, really is about whether or not Keir Starmer is actually quite happy to be seen to be having a fight with the former leader, Jeremy Corbyn, because he almost can't do enough to divorce himself from the previous leadership. And I think anything that goes to show that he's up for a bit of a tussle with Jeremy Corbyn is only a good thing. There's only also going to be difficulties as well for the local Labour members if they then choose to support Jeremy Corbyn. It could be the case, for example, that if they go out and campaign for him, if he does run to be an independent MP, then they would all potentially face being sort of frozen out of the Labour Party themselves. So it's a sort of way of trying to crack down on any of his supporters as well, which might be helpful for Keir Starmer.
Outside of Islington North, Aubrey, what's the view amongst the Labour Party in the wider country and amongst Labour MPs? Do they support Keir Starmer's decision to exclude Jeremy Corbyn from being a Labour MP, or do they take the view that the Labour Party should be a broad church and you know, Jeremy Corbyn was a Labour MP under Tony Blair and there's no reason why he couldn't be under Keir Starmer too?
I think there's no denying that Jeremy Corbyn still remains fairly popular locally. He's been the MP there for 40 years, since 1983, so it's very hard to have been the MP for that long and built up such a substantial majority without actually sort of commanding the affection of a lot of your constituents. And he is somebody that, you know, lives locally, is very, very tied to his community and seen as very present. So I think there's no question about the fact that he remains popular locally. But you're right to sort of draw attention to the broader national picture. I think the Labour Party feels as though it wants to sort of put the Corbyn years behind it. And while a lot of the policies of Jeremy Corbyn, when you sort of polled people on them individually, blindly, didn't tell them which party they were for or who was supporting them, some of them were popular at both the 2017 and 2019 elections. They do want to see Keir Starmer adopt some of those and also stick to some of his pledges that he made when he was running for the leadership in a bid to sort of ride on the coattails of Jeremy Corbyn. They do want a sort of a clear break from the past. And that's where Keir Starmer is proving quite successful in having put the Jeremy Corbyn years behind him and bringing, for example, lots more Jewish voters back to the party.
Aubrey Allegretti, thank you very much indeed for your insight there. And we're now joined by political commentator Dominic Samuels and also Assistant Editor-in-Chief of the London Financial, that's Andy MacDonald. So following on from that, a good fight to pick or a bit of a mistake? Because from where I come from, Corbyn had a big following, much more of a following than Keir Starmer's ever had.
Well, yeah, he had a big following. He brought a lot of people into the party that were supporters of Jeremy Corbyn more than maybe the Labour Party. But, you've got to think, in 1983, when he was actually elected as Member of Parliament for Islington North, it was because the Labour Party MP had been suspended. It was Michael O'Halloran. He was suspended for joining actually the SDP, which was the other side of it. So that's quite ironic. Islington North is clearly a bit taboo, but a jinxed constituency indeed. But it's important to note that the decision to not let him stand was voted on by the democratically elected NEC of the Labour Party. It was a vote that was passed, and to say that Jeremy Corbyn was a perfect leader when it came to this kind of thing isn't true. When he was leader, there were, flagrant violations of party democracy when it came to selections, because if you look at Ilford South, for example, Sam Tarry, that was a pretty big stitch-up. He's now been deselected in the end.
He's paying the price for that, isn't he?
But actually, Corbyn did stitch up that constituency selection, so, let he without sin cast the first stone, you know what I mean?
So, Dominic, what do you think? Do you think that if Corbyn stood as an independent in Islington North, that he'd beat the Labour Party candidate? Because there must be a good chance of that, do you not think?
I think he would, yeah, and I'm not quite sure. I know why Keir Starmer's sort of taken this position. It's in order to sort of repackage the Labour Party and appeal to the centre ground, because that's how he will win the next general election. It's not by appealing to the left, it's actually by appealing to former Tory voters, prospective former Tory voters. But at the same time, the Democrat in me thinks that it should be up to his constituents to decide whether or not they want him to stand as a Labour MP. And in actual fact, Keir Starmer's decision may actually backfire, because it may actually galvanise people towards supporting Corbyn. And if he stands as an independent and wins against the Labour Party, that will be a major blow to Keir Starmer's credibility as leader.
Dominic, he could actually cause more trouble, couldn't he? He could stand as the independent mayor of London, Corbyn, and cause the party even more problems.
That's a good point, actually. I have seen that idea floated around. And, if he did do that, Sadiq Khan's not that popular anymore. I mean, he won the last mayoral election, sort of scraped by, really, in a lot of people's view. So if Jeremy Corbyn did that, I think he would be pretty successful. So either way, I don't... Yeah.
It's made it into a bigger issue than it needed to be.
Yeah.
Andy, I just wonder whether politics is becoming a bit... what I worry about, that we've got Labour here, I guess, with Jeremy Corbyn. They're trying to get him out. The Conservatives have done something similar with Andrew Bridgen, because he was saying things that they didn't like. Is there a danger that the political parties are trying to make sure that everybody has the same opinion and nobody can have a different opinion, and go away from this idea that parties are broad churches?
Identikit MPs.
Well, I think, you can see this historically. It'll come in different forms, but if you think back to the 70s and 80s, where the whips had a lot more power, nobody ever broke the whip, and if they did, it was a really big deal. So it comes in different forms with, the new Twitter sphere. You'll obviously have more scrutiny from local membership and just the general public and the lobby journalists online. But I think that it's always been, there in one form or another, whether it's being called into the whip's office for a telling off or being cancelled on Twitter.
But that's what helps keep political parties alive, so I do agree with that. It's that idea.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but you are staying in the studio with us for more of this talk of what's been happening
because
today.
Coming up, the annual Sunday Times Rich List has been revealed. Who are the richest people in the country? And
it's nice to see them reunited for their 5th wedding anniversary. I'm talking about Meghan and Harry there. We'll be asking, has it been 5 years, and will it be happy ever after for them? But now it's time for the news with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Esther. Good morning. It's 11:33. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The brother of TV star Philip Schofield has been jailed for 12 years for child sex offences. Timothy Schofield, who is a civilian police worker, committed 11 offences between 2016 and 2019. Outside Bristol Crown Court, Detective Inspector Keith Smith said the boy who was abused by the 54-year-old showed remarkable bravery.
It's important to stress that before the allegations were made to the police in December, there were no prior complaints or allegations made about the defendant, and his former colleagues are horrified for the offences for which he's been convicted now. We want to be absolutely clear. We're on a mission to root out all of those who have betrayed the standards and the values we are committed to uphold. The public must be able to trust the police. officers and staff and protect that bond is our priority.
A 21-year-old man has pleaded guilty to plotting a gun attack at Speaker's Corner in London's Hyde Park. He was arrested last September while in a taxi carrying thousands of pounds of cash. Earlier this year, he denied preparing to commit acts of terrorism, but he's now changed his plea, admitting the charge at the Old Bailey. And Russian diamond imports to the UK are part of a new wave of sanctions against Moscow in response to the war in Ukraine. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's in Japan for the G7 summit, where he announced copper, aluminium and nickel imports have also been banned. In addition, the UK is preparing new individual sanctions against 86 people and companies. TV online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2430 and €1.1510. The price of gold is £1,582.78 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,776 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for physical investment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. Time now is 11:39.
Lots of views on things. The G7 has come up quite a bit. Arthur says Rishi's attendance at summits like the G7 are essential to maintain and uphold Britain's standing and influence around the world post-Brexit. How can we better our position in the global order if other countries don't know the Prime Minister's opinions?
And I like this one, Barbara. Got good news. Good news. Hi there. Hi, everybody. My husband, Victor, and I are very pleased with the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary's efforts. They're really trying to work hard there.
But Anstead says, morning, Esther and Phil, world leaders need a personality trait called gravitas. Unfortunately, Rishi doesn't have much of this. He's more like a head boy. So different views coming through there from our viewers. Now, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex celebrate their 5-year wedding anniversary today. A tumultuous few years, to say the least, but we wish them well, don't we?
We certainly do. They keep us entertained. Joining us to discuss the recent car chase is royal commentator Ingrid Stewart. Now, first of all, 5 years they've been together. It seemed like an awfully long 5 years to me, Ingrid, there. But do you think it is going to be happy ever after?
Well, I probably stand alone in this, but I think that Harry is very happy. He wanted to leave this country. He's got a beautiful house in California, a beautiful wife, gorgeous children, and maybe he does miss his homeland. I'm sure he does, but that was his choice and he made it. And I think Harry feels that he hasn't been able to make enough choices in his life. So I don't know about happy ever after. I don't think you can guarantee that for anyone, but I think he's happy in his amazing situation, and I think he's happy being controlled by Meghan.
It's all right, Ingrid. I'm happy being controlled by Esther.
To be like that, I really feel that he has found, he's found the right woman for himself.
So going back to this car chase, this near catastrophic car case, which had a nearly multiple sort of incidents and accidents, all very near, not quite happened, in other words. What do you make of this? What were they trying to do? They were definitely drawing on comparisons with Princess Diana. It was just them trying to get back into the news agenda. Quite distasteful, if you don't mind me saying.
Well, the rather tragic thing is that the award that Meghan was going to collect from Gloria Steinem, I mean, no one even knows what it was now because it's been totally overtaken. The whole evening has been overtaken by this paparazzi chase and near catastrophic. I suppose it was a near catastrophic moment, but I do think it was a very catastrophic moment for Harry and Meghan, and probably Doria Mum as well, being chased by paparazzi, because it doesn't happen in the UK. It really doesn't. Nothing like that would happen because they have royal protection. I mean, Harry may not have it now, but they certainly always had royal protection. So Harry wouldn't be used to that. So it would remind him of what happened to his mum. And I think that was probably, I'm sure being chased like that is terrifying. But unfortunately, Harry and Meghan's security appear to make it worse because they were blocking off roads. Remember, this is central Manhattan, and you can't really go very fast anywhere around Manhattan because the roads are full of potholes. There's traffic everywhere, lorries everywhere. It's not an easy place to negotiate. So it got very frenetic, and in the end, they got into a cab. Oh, they went to the police station. Then they were diverted into a cab, which drove them around and then took them back to the police station. It all sounds completely crazy, but it obviously was completely crazy. And I do actually think it was really unfortunate because although it's propelled them into the limelight again...
Ingrid, we're going to have to move on. Ingrid, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're going to have to move on, but we very much appreciate you joining us this morning. I did see something cruel on Twitter this morning. Cruel, funny.
I thought it was hilarious. Tell it, Phil, tell it.
It was a thing that said after 2 hours of a car chase, the paparazzi finally managed to shake off Meghan and Harry, which I thought you could argue was cruel, you could argue was funny.
Now, the Sunday Times Rich List is considered the most comprehensive list of who has got the most money in the UK.
This year's list features the King, the Prime Minister, a Catholic priest, 2 scrap metal dealers, a former tea lady, and the wealthiest Liverpudlian in history. Is that you, Esther?
I wish it were.
So do I.
So let's join now Robert Watts to give us the latest on who went up and who's come down on that rich list. Everybody likes to know who's come down on a rich list.
There's always a bit of schadenfreude, isn't there, Esther? People quite enjoy people going down the list. Well, Sir Richard Branson, pretty much a poster boy of the Sunday Times Rich List for many years. He's had a very tough year. His wealth, as far as we can see, fallen by 40% in a single year. It's a very, very different Rich List this year. It's all online now. You can go and read it, or if you prefer a print copy, that'll be in Sunday's paper as well. But in recent years, we saw record wealth year after year. We saw more billionaires than ever before. This is the first time that the number of billionaires has fallen since the financial crisis for 14 years. Why has that happened? Well, it's a combination of things: a bursting of the tech bubble, the fact that interest rates have risen highly, and those jitters creeping through the banking industry. So it's a bit more of a downbeat year, but there's still wealth being made in, as you say, extraordinary ways. Scrap metal merchants, discount retailers, and then a sort of this array of very impressive young entrepreneurs selling all sorts of bits and pieces. Vodka, lingerie, gym wear, all sorts of things.
So, Robert, you're going to have to tell us, we've teed it up, who is the wealthiest person in Liverpudlian history? You're going to have to tell... I thought it was Esther, but it isn't, apparently. I thought it might be more Paul McCartney, but it doesn't seem to be him either. Who is it?
It's this guy called Tom Morris, who no one's ever heard of. A typical rich lister in many ways. These people are often very, very, very quiet, very, very low profile. He set up a firm in the mid-70s when he was in his 20s called Home Bargains, that discount retailer. And funnily enough, amid a cost of living crisis, who does very, very well? It's often those discount retailers. So, a few years ago, we all thought, online retail was the thing, but high streets were dying, and we all want to buy stuff online. He's showing that actually a high street presence, real world shopping.
What I was going to say, Robert, is everybody loves a bargain, as he proved it to be. But there's other interesting characters there, isn't there? There's a 33-year-old chap expelled from school, and within 7 years he's made hundreds of millions of pounds. These are the ones I like, the characters.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, this guy, you can go and read his interview now. That's online. This guy called Vishal Korea, expelled from school at the age of 17. Why? Because he couldn't focus in class. He was much more interested in talking to his mates. Very social guy. It wasn't until 7 years after he left school that he was diagnosed with ADHD. And now he says that is a key reason why his business has been successful. Some people with ADHD have this ability to be able to hyper-focus and remember all sorts of things that us mere mortals can't. He says he can remember 3,500 prices for the fragrances, beauty products he sells. It's all in his head. And he can also juggle, multitask in a way that a lot of us really struggle to do. So he is an inspiring story, but he's not the only one. As I say, there are people. Well,
Robert Watts, we're all going to go and read it now. We're going to go and read it now and find inspiration from those who've made the hundreds of millions in the last couple of years. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Robert, there, who compiles the list.
Yeah, we're still joined by political commentator Dominique Samuels and Assistant Editor-in-Chief of the London Financial, Andy MacDonald. Andy, I wanted to ask you...
I want to know about the car chase, what anybody thought of that car chase, the Meghan and Harry car chase. I don't know whether to start with you, Dominic. It just seems to me like a really sort of fabricated nonsense. For one bit, they had police escort. Why did the police let them go around for 75 minutes before they pulled in for some sort of security in a police station?
I have no clue, Esther. I'm sorry. With this story... I don't really have an opinion on it because none of us were there, so none of us really know.
So it shouldn't be a story, it's a nonsense.
I do think it's a bit like this obsession with Harry and Meghan and, the claims that they make and then discrediting the claims and round it goes. I just think it...
But do you think it's them pushing it out?
I mean, it might be, but at the same time, you know, they do have... I mean, in America specifically, I will just say, as someone who was quite interested in celebrities like the Kardashians at one point, the paparazzi are known for literally hunting you down in cars to the point where it can get very dangerous. I think with Harry in particular, and also the axe that he sort of has to grind with the media, he may have that sort of hypervigilance in his mind, and then that sort of, the hypervigilance, the panic, the bias, may have caused his people, his security to panic, which may have indeed made the situation worse. So I think serious miscommunication, I think, on both sides.
I'm with you, Dominique. I mean, I couldn't care less what Harry and Meghan did, to be perfectly honest. So I wanted, Andy, to ask you, earlier in the show, we were talking to Dave Ward, the General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union. What do you think about this spat between the Royal Mail and the union about who's to blame for their £1 billion loss?
Well, it's just baffling, really. You know, throughout the kind of spin war when the strikes were going on between the management of Royal Mail, International Distribution Services, their parent company, and the CWU, the IDS actually put the value of the strikes, the detriment of the strikes, at 200 million. Where's the other 800 million? You know, they had he's recently resigned, actually, but the Chief Executive Officer, Simon Thompson, you know, he was incompetent. How does one lose £1 billion in a year? It's absolutely ridiculous. You know, I wouldn't trust Simon Thompson to run me a bath, let alone a national company. It's ridiculous.
It's had a checkered past, though, hasn't it? It's been difficult for some time, them finding their new place in the world. However, he would also say the year before, they did make nearly 600 million in profits. Now, you might say that was down to lockdown, and in one way or another, people are shopping online. So it did go from 577 million in profit to this, as you say, collapse 748 in deficit.
4 years previous to that, they were at a loss as well. It was a temporary spike.
And it never modernised. They never modernised.
They're a thing of the past. You know, it's been privatised, was it the last decade, 2013 it was, by Vince Cable when he was business secretary. They're losing to the competition, you know, Amazon, all the other private delivery companies. It's free market. Surely, Dominic, you'll think free market. You'd love this, surely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a rabid free marketeer ideologue, to be honest, and I think...
Why not?
Because I don't think that in specific cases, I don't think the idea of competition at any cost actually works. And I think in this regard, especially with Royal Mail, I think we've seen that it's not actually worked. Because when people talk about the free market, we're talking about little to no regulation. But that's not actually been the case with this free market privatisation of Royal Mail. There's not really any competition. And actually, they've not been able to compete against the likes of Amazon.
You just want letters and parcels delivered on time. And if a quarter of your first class aren't on time, you have a problem. It's a bad product.
Yeah.
I wanted, Andy, to ask you, we had Liam Halligan on earlier talking about the issue with the car industry, and particularly with electric cars, the thing about giving a huge amount of subsidy for batteries, not having enough charging points. Where are you on this? I mean, my view is that there's no way on God's earth we're going to hit this target of banning all petrol and diesel cars by 2030. That was also Liam's view. What's your view?
I was at a really interesting event a couple of weeks ago at the Centre for Policy Studies, which is a bit away from my political persuasion. However, you know, I listen to all sides of the argument.
Infiltrating,
exactly.
were you?
I was
notes.
Unfortunately, I was reporting, and I was listening. I can't remember his name, but he's just been announced as the Reform UK candidate for Mayor of London.
Oh, Howard Cox.
Yeah, Howard Cox. That's it. He's this big kind of pro-consumer guy, and he made some actually pretty bang-on points about it. There isn't the infrastructure. You know, we should be focusing on building infrastructure in the northeast, in the Midlands, because when you look at this, it's very city-centric, where there is the infrastructure from people like Tesla, people from Toyota, you know. But if you look at your average working-class person, say in, I don't know, Derbyshire, they'll be on third-hand cards. They'll be picking up zingers for 1,200 quid from a car sale. You know, they're not going to want to spend 40 grand on a new
And was this not the problem, Dominic? People were saying electric's the new way forward, and actually there was not the basic infrastructure.
No, and it's because it's part of this frenzied drive towards net zero. And look, you know, I appreciate that there may be environmental benefits of electric cars, but at what cost to actual individuals if we can't keep up with what governments and what politicians who, you know, want to feel like they're saving the planet are demanding. I just worry about the average person. I think the actual ramifications to, the climate, if we're going to talk about people that can't afford to switch to electric cars or the people that are being priced out of driving, I think the costs might outweigh the benefits.
I'm with you.
Dominique and Andy, I know you had more to say there. I could see Andy wanting to get in, which says to me you've both got to come back on the show and finish the conversation, but that's all we've got time for today. Up next, it's GB News Live with Mark Longhurst, and we'll be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. with a whole range of topics.
Yes, we're going to have a debate on facial recognition, whether it's an infringement on your civil liberties or vital for your security, and we're going to have the UK's youngest landlady joining us too. Don't miss that. See you tomorrow.
Hello again, welcome to your GB News forecast brought to you by the Met Office. I'm Aidan McGivern. Brighter skies in the north today, but showers will drift further south, and the risk by the afternoon of some thunderstorms developing. It's all associated with a cold front, a weak cold front that's sinking south across the country, not bringing much rainfall, but that will destabilise into the afternoon as temperatures rise, leading to that risk of showers and thunderstorms, especially in a line from, say, the South Pennines into the Midlands towards Dorset. That's where the greatest risk of slow-moving heavy downpours, thunderstorms, even some hail is likely. So some localised impacts from this, particularly for central southern parts of England. Away from those showers, though, some signs of brightness and certainly a brighter day for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, and feeling warmer as a result, 15 to 19 degrees generally. Now, the showers in the south tend to drift their way towards southwest England